Hello there, and welcome to Mystroot, where time forgets its pace and the past rises like mist from the quiet earth. Before we step into tonight's long-forgotten world, I want to gently ask, how are you? Are you comfortable? Are you listening in your room with a low light flickering? Or from the passenger seat of a car under midnight skies? Or maybe you just tucked yourself into bed, your phone dimmed to a faint glow as you prepare to drift? Wherever you are, whatever your day has been, I'm glad you found your way here. This is a place for softness, for slowness, for stories that don't rush. If you find peace in these whispered journeys through the lesser-known past, I kindly ask that you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for me, but so that more sleepy travelers like you can find their way to this quiet corner of the internet where history hums beneath lullabies. Now, close your eyes if you wish, let your shoulders grow heavier, and imagine the warm wind of the southern African valleys brushing softly against your skin. Our story begins not in bloodshed, not with kings or conquests, but with a slow sunrise in the gentle heart of what would one day be called the Zulu Kingdom. Long before the name Shaka echoed across the land, before maps had carved lines between peoples and empires, before anyone from Europe had stepped across the Drakensberg Mountains with paper treaties and rifles, there was simply life, lived in rhythm with the land. Imagine waking in a round, grass-thatched hut called an amuzi, the air cool and still, your eyes opening slowly to the gray light of dawn as it peeks through the woven mat that serves as your door. The floor beneath you is hard-packed earth, swept smooth by your mother's hands. You shift slightly on your sleeping mat, worn cowhide stretched taut across low reed supports, and you feel the faint creak in your legs from yesterday's training drills. Around you, the sounds of life return like old friends. The lowing of cattle in the kraal beyond the fence, the distant echo of birds calling from the thorn trees, the soft brush of feet against dirt as someone, maybe your younger brother, walks to the river to fetch water. Smoke curls gently into the air, not from chimneys, but from a center fire pit where an older sister stokes coals for the morning meal. The smell is earthy, ancient, with smoke, fermenting milk, wet grass, and the faint metallic tang of ochre that still clings to your skin. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes with the back of your hand, and reach for the gourd of water left at your side. It's cool. Not cold, but cool. Drawn from the deep clay pot buried beneath the hut's shade where it keeps like a whisper of the night's breath. You pour a little onto your palm, splash it over your face, and feel your body reawaken. Outside, your mother calls softly in Ayasivalu, her voice both melody and command. The older boys will gather soon for morning drills, and the air carries a quiet urgency. You rise and dust your legs, brushing off bits of hide and grass. Your kilt, made from soft strips of cowhide, sways lightly as you step into the open. There's no rush. The sun is still low, casting long golden spears across the land, gilding everything it touches in a sleepy warmth. The village, clustered huts with wide cattle enclosures at their heart, begins to stir. Women hum as they pound sorghum with heavy wooden pestles, the rhythmic thunk-thunk echoing in time with the pulse of life itself. Children run barefoot over the reddish soil, chasing chickens or one another, laughing in bursts that rise like birdsong then vanish. The elders, wrapped in thick cloaks even in this mild morning air, sit in shaded spots and sip fermented milk from hollowed calabashes, their eyes already distant with thought. You walk with calm steps to the fire pit where your portion of uphuthu waits. Crumbly maize porridge made without rush, just as it has always been made. It's simple. It's enough. You scoop it with your fingers, warm and slightly grainy, and wash it down with a drink of sour milk. Amici, thick and rich, a taste you've known since before memory. There is no sugar, no salt shaker, no porcelain plate, but somehow this feels more real than any banquet. When a meal is done, you join the others. The warriors, or rather the warriors in training. For you're young still, maybe 17 or 18, old enough to know how to hold a spear properly, how to shield yourself with a cowhide shield. Isolangu, but still watched closely by those with more scars, more stories, more ghosts. You gather near the open clearing just beyond the huts, where the earth is packed hard by years of stamping feet. The training begins not with shouting, not with aggression, but with formation. You line up. You breathe together. You feel the rhythm begin deep in your legs as the chant starts. Low, wordless, just vibration. The leader steps forward, his voice calm and commanding. One foot forward. Stamp. Another. Stamp. The dust rises slightly. Shields are raised, held tight against the shoulder, spears gripped low, not thrown, but thrust as taught by the old ways. This is the method taught by Shaka himself in his time, though his name is still just a whisper in the air. He believes in close combat. He believes in unity. He believes in turning bodies into storms. But this morning, there is no war, only training, discipline, precision. You move as one, and though your muscles ache, you feel a strange peace in the repetition. Again and again. Stamp. Strike. Shield up. Breathe. Pause. The elder warriors correct gently, not with anger, but with slow touches. They remember their own youth. They remember when their hands first shook with the weight of a real spear, when sweat stung their eyes and the rhythm felt overwhelming. They are not your enemies. They are your guides. When a session ends, there is no applause, no cheer, just a soft dispersal, like leaves on water. You walk back slowly, feeling the lightness of fatigue settle into your limbs like warm sand. Someone cracks a joke, your friend, perhaps, teasing you for slipping in the line, and you laugh quietly. Not because it's especially funny, but because the sound feels good in your chest. You head to the river next to wash. The water is not clear like glass, but clean enough. You kneel at the bank, cupping it into your hands, letting it run over your skin. The beads on your wrists jingle softly. Red, white, black. Each color a quiet code of meaning, of affection, of status. They were strung for you by your sister. She was careful, smiling without showing teeth, humming an old song while she worked. You think of her now as the river flows through your fingers. Maybe you'll bring her a smooth stone from the bottom, just for fun. When you return, the sun is higher now. The village is busy. Your father works in the fields, bending low, his shadow stretching long across the sorghum rows. You take a gourd of water to him. He doesn't say much. He nods. You understand. He is grateful, and you stay by his side for a while, helping him dig, helping him weed. The work is slow, and the earth smells sweet. The day stretches ahead with its own quiet rhythm. No meetings, no horns, no screens. Just the gentle hum of life in motion. And as the afternoon unfolds, you find yourself sitting beneath the shade of a wild fig tree, watching the sky change colors, the wind carrying whispers through the grass, and you wonder, not with urgency, but with softness, what the world looks like beyond the hills. But for now, there is nothing more you must do. Just sit, just breathe, just be. The day continues without hurry, like a river that knows exactly where it needs to go. And as the sun lifts higher into the quiet expanse above, the warrior, young and strong but still touched by boyhood softness, moves through the woven details of life in the Zulu heartland, where time moves not in seconds or minutes, but in seasons and footsteps, where a day is not measured by chimes or clocks, but by the shifting shadows of cattle and the color of light on the thatched rooftops of the homestead, and everything, every task, every motion, every quiet glance has rhythm and meaning and a history whispered through it. There is work to be done, of course, but it is never work in the way we know it today. It is not rushed. It is not interrupted by alerts or alarms. It is not imposed by distant supervisors or tight deadlines. It is rather a kind of sacred repetition, the tending of cattle, the weaving of mats, the mending of fences, the gathering of firewood, all done with a sense of inherited motion, as if the hands remember even before the mind commands them. And as the young warrior joins his uncles in, smoothing the hard-packed courtyard earth with a grass broom or walks with his cousins to gather reeds by the wetland banks, there is a calm that settles around him, not from boredom, but from the familiarity of motion passed down across generations. The landscape itself seems to participate in this daily rhythm. The rustling of long, dry grass, the silent glide of a hawk overhead, the distant echo of a drum played lazily by a child experimenting with sound, all of it working in gentle harmony, the way wind joins water or firelight warms a stone. Around midday, the heat gathers more tightly on the ground, shimmering in quiet waves across the soil, and people find shade beneath the wide acacia trees, talking in low tones, cleaning gourds, weaving new patterns into their mats or garments, while toddlers nap on their mothers' backs and older children toss carved bones and simple games that echo with giggles and short exclamations. And the warrior, reclining in the shadow of a sun-warmed rock, runs a blade over his spear shaft, checking for cracks or imperfections, knowing that even if no battle comes today or tomorrow, his readiness must never falter. The spear is not only a weapon, but a symbol. It is the spine of the warrior, the memory of his people, the echo of ancestors who once stood in defense of the land when outsiders crept through the hills or rival tribes tested the boundaries of honor. And he regards it not with obsession, but with a kind of quiet reverence, polishing the iron tip with oil rendered from crushed seeds, wrapping the handle with softened hide to strengthen his grip, running his fingers over the familiar weight as one might do with an old flute or prayer bead. He does not think of killing. He thinks of standing, of holding, of belonging. The afternoon passes in layers, like sediment settling in a slow-moving stream, and eventually, as shadows begin to stretch again and a mild wind stirs the edge of the forest line, he rises and joins a small group moving toward the outskirts of the settlement, toward the narrow trails that wind past boulders and termite mounds into the wider grazing lands where the cattle are herded each day. There, the land opens into great swaths of wildness. Not wilderness, not danger, but untamed stretches of life where the grazing animals become part of the landscape like clouds become part of the sky, and a young warrior walks beside his cousin, who whistles softly through a curved reed to guide the cattle forward, the sound gentle and sure, a signal they have heard since calfhood. The cows, their hides shimmering with health, their horns wide like crescents, respond with low murmurs, chewing slowly, contentedly, and now and then a younger one breaks into a small sprint only to settle quickly. Its energy spent in moments, and the men walk among them not like conquerors, but like caretakers, like watchers of an ancient inheritance. The cattle are more than animals. They are memory, economy, and legacy all in one. Bride price, food, status, and story. And every Zulu boy grows up knowing that the well-being of the herd reflects the health of the family itself. As the sun begins its slow descent and paints the hills in shades of burnt amber and violet gray, the group turns back, the cattle walking in lazy formation, their hooves stirring dust that glows in the golden light. And as they near the homestead, the smells of cooking become stronger. Roasted maize, wild greens boiled in clay pots, smoke laced with the scent of marrow bones simmering into broth. The women work near the fire, their heads wrapped in dyed cloth, their hands quick and capable, their conversation rhythmic and low, weaving laughter and complaint into something soothing. The warrior pauses just outside the ring of huts to wash his feet in a shallow wooden basin, then steps inside to greet his mother, bowing slightly, his voice quiet with respect, for though he is now nearly a man, and trains as a soldier, and walks with a spear, he is still her son, and her word still grounds him like a tree trunk grounds a branch. Dinner is not a feast, but a comfort. Warm pap, tender bits of meat, a sour milk to wash it down, and a shared silence that doesn't need to be filled. When night settles fully, when the stars prick the sky like ancient beads strung across black velvet, the village changes character. Not in sound, for it was never loud, but in temperature, in feeling, in scent. The air cools. The fire's crackle becomes the loudest note. Children curl against their mothers. Men sit in small groups, sometimes speaking, sometimes not, and old stories are told. Not read, not written, but told. Passed mouth to mouth, ear to ear, unchanged but alive, and the warrior listens. A story about a great hunt, or a forgotten spirit who once danced under a blood moon, or a river that sings names if you're quiet enough. These tales, never written down, are remembered with such clarity that each pause feels sacred, each detail purposeful, and even the flickering light against the storyteller's face feels like punctuation. The warrior hears, and he stores the tale, and maybe one day he will be the one to tell it. But not tonight. Tonight, he yawns, soft and long, the kind of yawn that lives in the chest, and when he rises, it is without fuss, without ceremony. He walks toward his hut. The path is familiar beneath his feet. The grass parts for him without resistance. He enters and lies down, the cowhide mat still warm from the sun that reached it earlier, and the weight of the day, not heavy like burden, but heavy like satisfaction, settles over him. Outside, a dog barks once and is silent. Inside, he rolls onto his side, one hand resting on his beaded necklace, fingers brushing the charms tied by his sister. He thinks for a moment about the river, the cattle, the story he just heard. Then he thinks about nothing. The night holds him. The wind hums a low lullaby, and he sleeps. Morning comes not with urgency, but with presence, as the faintest gray lifts the edges of the thatched hut and the cold breath of night exhales one last sigh into the waking village, and the young warrior stirs beneath his woven mat, his body reluctant to part with sleep, yet aware of the rhythm that waits beyond the doorway. A rhythm shaped not by duty alone, but by a lifetime of sunrises and their slow unfolding. He opens his eyes to the familiar domed ceiling of the Amuzi, the woven reeds overhead casting thin shadows in the diffused dawn, and for a moment he simply lies still, listening to the earliest sounds, the creak of drying leather, the quiet patter of goats' hooves moving toward the kraal, the murmur of women tending embers in their hearths, coaxing flames back to life without a single match or spark tool. Only breath and patience and the old ways. There is comfort in this slowness. His body remembers the feel of the earth, the way one shoulder presses more firmly into the mat than the other, the pattern of cool and warm spots as the temperature of the air shifts almost imperceptibly. He stretches one leg, then the other, toes flexing against the hardened floor, the morning air brushing his skin like river mist. There is no alarm clock to force him up, no sharp noise to startle him into motion. Instead, his rise is as natural as the light, his steps timed with the village itself. Outside, the eastern sky holds the soft glow of promise, that in between time, when color returns to the world, when the silhouettes of thatched huts begin to sharpen and trees regain their leaves, no longer shadows, but living shapes again. He steps out quietly, not to wake those still sleeping, though most have already begun to stir in one way or another, voices hushed, actions deliberate. The ground is cool beneath his feet, and he stands for a moment with his eyes closed, simply breathing deep, slow breaths that fill his lungs with the smell of dust, ash, cow dung, and dew, the scent of a place both lived in and alive. The cattle in the enclosure sway softly, tails flicking, breath misting faintly in the air, and somewhere nearby, a mother sings to her infant, not for entertainment, but for reassurance, the kind of melody that keeps fear from creeping in with the dark. The warrior moves to the communal basin where rainwater has been collected, dipping his hands, splashing his face, the chill awakening but not jarring, and he lets the water run down his arms before wiping it away with a length of hide. Breakfast, when it comes, is humble, unchanged. A scoop of upathu, the crumbly maize porridge shaped loosely in the hand, eaten with no fork or spoon, only fingers, followed by a long drink of fermented milk poured from a calabash, thick, sour, and satisfying. There are no menus here, no choices to ponder. What is offered is shared. What is shared is enough. After eating, he retrieves his weapons and begins walking toward the clearing used for morning exercises. The ikawa is shorter than a European spear, designed for close combat, for engagement not at distance, but at the press of breath and flesh, and he carries it with a kind of reverence. Not because he seeks violence, but because the spear represents lineage, survival, and discipline. His shield is made from cowhide, cured and shaped to curve slightly, its handle familiar to his grip, worn smooth by hours of practice and weather. Other young warriors are already gathering. There is no loud roll call, no shouting instructor. Instead, the assembly is fluid, responsive, as if summoned by the rustling of wind or the memory of movement. They form lines, not perfectly straight, but precise enough, and begin with slow steps, measured breaths, soft footfalls that rise into a dance of technique. Stomp, thrust, guard, withdraw, stomp, shield twist, return. The dust stirs and settles. A cadence begins, not shouted, but breathed, each warrior falling into place, losing the individual in favor of the collective. A lead voice hums a low rhythm, almost like a lullaby, guiding without commanding. The sun, now higher, glints off ochre-smeared shoulders and sweat-beaded brows. This is not sport. This is not for display. This is memory in motion. The drills teach more than battle. They teach control, presence, awareness of self and other. They are as much about resisting fear as they are about inflicting harm. And beneath the physical effort is something older, something deeper, a spiritual inheritance, a movement remembered by the land itself. After the training, the warriors disband in pairs and small groups, moving slowly, talking little. Fatigue is present, but not heavy. It rests in the limbs like warm weight, not pain. Some return to their homesteads to fetch tools for field work. Others walk to tend to cattle, or help mend fences, or collect firewood with siblings and cousins. The warrior chooses a path leading toward the forest's edge, where he and two others are tasked with gathering branches for repairs. The walk is long but unhurried. Along the way, they pass termite mounds taller than a man, anthills older than most trees, shaped by tiny bodies working in unknowable harmony. They pass flowers with petals like flames, thorn trees whose shadows ripple like nets on the ground. Birds dart between branches, calling in sharp, staccato notes, and one of the young men clicks his tongue in response, mimicking the sound for sport. When they reach the trees, they fan out slightly, choosing straight limbs, testing each one with a flex of the hand, a quick twist to see if it will split cleanly. As they gather the wood, they talk in soft voices, not about war or girls, or even cattle, but about the feel of the wind, the smell of a coming storm, the way the stars have shifted slightly these past few nights. There's wisdom in such small talk. Embedded in it is a lifelong relationship with land and sky. They bind the wood with strips of bark and begin the walk home, their burdens balanced on their shoulders, their pace unchanged. By the time they return, the sun is high and the village is alive with low-level noise, the kind that soothes rather than distracts. The sounds of children playing, women laughing, men hammering iron in the forge pit, their tools fashioned from scavenged meteorite or traded ore. The warrior drops the bundle beside the hut where repairs will begin tomorrow. For now, he takes shade near a low wall and removes the beads from his neck, untangling them, running his fingers across each colored segment. Every bead has meaning, some given by his sister, others by his mother or a friend, some earned, some gifted during special rites. The colors speak of longing, loyalty, and lineage, their messages understood instantly by those who read them like a second language. As the afternoon stretches, a group of elders begins to gather near the central fire, preparing for a storytelling circle. Children rush to find places. Even young warriors like himself join, sitting cross-legged, leaning in slightly. The storyteller is a man with a voice like wind over gravel, slow and patient, each word shaped with purpose. His stories are not fiction. They are history in parable and song. He speaks of how the ancestors moved with the elephants, how the rivers were once narrower, how lightning once struck a tree in the northern hills and gave birth to a healer. The warrior listens, not with wide-eyed wonder, but with reverence. He knows these stories. He has heard them before. But like songs sung many times, their repetition is not a flaw. It is a feature. Each telling adds a layer. Each pause invites reflection. And as the sun begins its descent once more, as the light becomes golden and honeyed, dripping over the fields and thatched roofs, he feels something ancient awaken inside him. Not knowledge, not pride, but place. He belongs. He always has, and he always will. Evening settles slowly over the land, not as a sudden dimming, but as a gradual hush, a soft thickening of the air that nudges life toward quieter rhythms. And the young warrior, now leaning against the smooth trunk of an ancient knobthorn tree, watches the sky as it turns from gold to bronze to charcoal, his spear resting beside him, his bare feet pressing gently into the cooling soil, his breath slow and steady like the rhythm of cattle chewing in the distance and around. Him the Muzi, the village, seems to hold its breath in a kind of peace only known in places untouched by modern noise. No cars, no street lamps, no machines humming behind walls, only the low murmurs of tired voices, the rustle of thatch in the breeze, the shuffle of a calabash being moved from one fire circle to another. His body is weary from the day's movements, training, walking, chopping, carrying, but it is not an unpleasant fatigue. It is a kind that lives in the muscles like firelight in coals, glowing softly beneath the skin, whispering that rest is well-earned and food will taste richer for it. He watches as his mother tends a small flame beneath a clay pot, stirring it with a carved stick, the scent of stew thickening the air, rich with marrow and crushed wild greens. And not far from her, two older women braid one another's hair in slow, deliberate movements, each gesture careful, patient, purposeful. The women speak softly, occasionally chuckling, their words blending with the sound of goats settling in the crawl and the click of beads brushing against wrists. The village at dusk is a living thing, breathing, humming, gently turning in on itself like a bird folding its wings. The warrior walks to the cattle pen, runs his hand along the curved spine of the lead bull, whose ears twitch slightly in acknowledgement, but who remains calm beneath his touch, a creature of strength and stillness bred through generations to be both resource and symbol. And he lingers there, eyes tracing the fading horizon where the last lavender light pools low across the hills, thinking not of tomorrow's tasks, not of enemies or glory, but simply of the way the world feels when it quiets. After helping secure the crawl gate, woven thick with thorn branches to keep predators at bay, he returns to the main circle where family gathers to eat, and he takes his place near the fire, cross-legged, his bowl passed to him with a nod, his thanks whispered in return. The food is simple but sacred. Pap, thick and hot, shaped with the fingers and dipped in a broth, meat pulled gently from bones and shared freely. Even the smallest portions passed down to children with laughter and patience. Conversation during the meal is not urgent. There are long pauses, broken only by the crackle of the fire or the rustle of wind. And when someone does speak, a question, a small memory, a short tale, it is listened to with full attention, as if each word is a string tying everyone closer. After the meal, a low song begins, not performed but remembered, an old tune hummed by the eldest uncle, then echoed quietly by others, and eventually the young warrior joins in too, his voice low, untrained but steady, the melody wrapping around them like another layer of warmth. The song is not translated. It needs no translation. It is about cattle, about ancestors, about a bird that flew too far and was called home by its name. Music here is not spectacle. It is sustenance. It carries weight. When the song ends, no one claps, no one comments. They simply sit a little longer, the silence deeper now, more settled. The fire burns lower, throwing tall shadows onto the domed huts, flickering against the reeds and mud, making the familiar structures look dreamlike, sacred, like pieces of the sky that fell and grew walls. Slowly, people begin to rise, stretch, return to their huts. The warrior lingers, not quite ready to sleep, and he walks alone toward the ridge beyond the village, barefoot, feeling the small stones beneath his soles, the coolness of grass between his toes. At the top, he sits back resting against a rock, eyes turned skyward. Above him, the stars are fierce and steady, unchallenged by man-made light. Each constellation a story told to him since boyhood. The lion that guards the heavens, the river that loops through the sky, the eyes of the great ancestor who never closed them. He watches the stars in silence, his mind adrift, but not troubled. He is not worried. He is not racing. He is present. The moon rises slow and round, casting silver onto the trees and rooftops, and he allows himself to imagine the world beyond the horizon, not with longing, but with curiosity, wondering how far the rivers stretch, whether the ocean tastes of stories or silence, whether the sky looks the same in the lands where traders say the buildings reach taller than trees. But he does not envy it. This world, is full. Slowly, he makes his way back to his hut, pushing aside the reed mat that hangs at the entrance, stepping into the cool darkness. The coals in the center hearth are faint now, their glow a last breath of day, and he lies down on the cowhide mat, pulling a second hide over his shoulders, the night air cold against his neck. He curls slightly, arms wrapped around himself, and listens as the sounds of sleep settle across the homestead. Occasional snoring, the shifting of an animal, the distant howl of something wild far beyond the fields. Sleep does not take him suddenly. It rises like mist, slowly covering his thoughts, softening the edges of memory and sensation. He thinks briefly of the girl with the shy smile who lives in the neighboring village, of her hands as she sifted flour the last time he saw her, of the way her eyes flicked toward his and away again like birds darting through reeds. He smiles to himself. The memory is enough. No words were spoken, but 1,000 things were exchanged. That is how love begins here, in gestures and glances in time. The night stretches long and peaceful, punctuated by the gentle cadence of breath, of wind, of unseen wings stirring air above the trees. Dreams come not in wild flashes, but in long, meandering paths. He walks again beside his brother, fishing in a shallow stream. He climbs a tree to shake down ripe marula fruit. He hears his grandfather's voice calling from the fire, telling him to listen. And in the dream, he listens. Always he listens. The village sleeps on, a constellation of quiet life held together by shared rhythm, shared ground, and the unbroken thread of memory stretching backward, farther than a mind can hold. And as the first pale light of morning begins its return, touching the farthest branches with faintest gold, the warrior's breath is even, his body still, his mind resting in that deep place between past and present, where the land remembers him and he remembers the land. In the slow light of early morning, where the horizon hums with pale gold and the birds begin their quiet arithmetic of sound, the young warrior rises again, not from alarm, but from the natural call of rhythm that his body has come to understand like breath itself. And as he moves, quietly, with bare feet brushing against the smoothed earth of the hut's floor, he does not speak, not out of shyness or reluctance, but because in these hours silence is not emptiness, it is reverence, a shared. Agreement among all who live in the Amuzi that the day must begin softly, like a song hummed rather than shouted. And this softness follows him as he lifts the reed mat door, stepping into the fresh air where the dew still coats the grasses in beads that sparkle briefly before fading into the warmth of the coming sun. And the world around him is still painted in long shadows and cool blues. And the smoke rising from early fires curls upward in slow-motion spirals, carrying the scent of last night's embers and the promise of breakfast. Across the compound, elders stir slowly from their huts, wrapped in thick blankets of woven wool dyed with earthy colors, browns, ochres, and reds, moving with the deliberate pace of people who carry many years and many stories, while younger children emerge in bursts of energy, chasing each other barefoot across the damp earth, their laughter like flutes cutting through the morning's calm. The warrior, still quiet, crosses to the water basin where he washes his face, the cold of the liquid shocking his cheeks awake, his fingers brushing away sleep and preparing him not just for training or labor, but for presence, for the act of being fully inside his body in a world that expects awareness. Today, he knows, is not like the others. It is not a market day, nor a ceremonial day, but a day for inspection, a day when the Induna, the head warrior, will walk among the young men and assess their readiness, not only in strength or posture or discipline, but in how they carry themselves, how their shields have been maintained, how their clothing has been cared for, how their attitudes rest within the collective. And so, after a modest meal of boiled sorghum and sour milk, he moves with the others toward the outer training fields, a path worn into the landscape by decades of sandals and bare heels pressing into the same soil. And as they walk, no one hurries. There's no need to rush, for time is not a beast to be outrun here. It is a slow river that bends to the will of the season, and the people within it flow accordingly. At the field, they line up as they always do, arranged not by height or age, but by cohort, by initiation group, by those who have bled together in drills and laughed beside the same fires. They hold their canto, the spear, not like a tool but like a memory, the shaft oiled smooth and the blade polished with ash and elbow grease until it catches even the weak morning light like silver. Their Icelangu, the shield made from stretched and dried cowhide, is shaped in the oval style of the Royal Army, tall enough to protect the body, but light enough to move with grace. And each man adjusts the shield strap carefully over his forearm, ensuring the grip is tight but not rigid, because rigidity can break you, but flexibility saves lives. The Induna arrives with no fanfare. He is an older man with a straight back and a face marked not only by wrinkles, but by a kind of stillness earned through experience. His presence makes the younger warrior straighten instinctively, not out of fear, but respect, because this is a man who has seen battle, who has stood in real formations, who has buried friends and carried orders across riverbeds under threat of ambush. He walks slowly down the row, his eyes scanning not just weapons but faces, posture, readiness of spirit, and the young warrior, though calm, feels his heartbeat quicken slightly as the Induna nears. There is no shame in nerves. Every young man feels them, but none admit it aloud. When inspection ends, there is a short speech, measured, patient, never raised in volume. And it is about more than combat. It is about restraint, about how true strength is not in the arms, but in the mind, how a warrior must learn to wait, to listen, to obey not just orders but instinct. The group then begins their drills, not rushed but precise, a choreography of intention. The shield forward, the spear thrust low, the sidestep and pivot, the low stance that deflects blows and launches counters. Dust rises, feet stamp, breaths are taken in unison. The sound is not loud but steady. It is a rhythm, and the warrior feels it carry him, like a current, like music. When training ends, sweat glistens on backs and foreheads, and the men split off to bathe and rest. No one boasts. There is no ranking, no scoreboard, only the mutual understanding that each man is watching, learning, refining. The warrior moves toward the stream beyond the training ground, where he wades into water that is cold enough to make him gasp but not retreat, and he scrubs himself with a handful of fine gravel and reeds, washing away dust and exertion, letting the chill pull him into focus. As he dries off beneath a sun-warmed rock, he thinks about the stories the Induna once told, about warriors who lost battles not because of weakness, but because they ignored omens, because they spoke too much, or slept too deeply, or laughed too loudly in enemy territory. These are the deeper lessons, the unspoken ones. Back at the homestead, the afternoon unfolds with its usual calm. Repairs to the fence line, the tending of goats, the weaving of baskets. Women sing as they work, their songs old and without written words, passed down in sound alone. Children sit in circles learning to bead or count in rhythms based on a cattle's gait. The warrior spends part of his afternoon helping his father reinforce a storage hut with mud mixed from the riverbank, his hands deep in cool, wet earth, shaping it onto the reed walls in layers that will dry hard as stone. They speak little, but each understands the other perfectly. In this culture, words are used sparingly. Wisdom is often silent. Afterward, the warrior is sent to deliver a message to a neighboring village. Nothing urgent, only the confirmation of a planned visit. But the walk itself becomes a meditation. The path winds through open fields dotted with low acacia trees, and his sandals press into dry soil, leaving faint impressions that will vanish by morning. Along the way, he passes a group of girls fetching water in clay pots balanced expertly on their heads, their conversation marked by giggles and sudden bursts of laughter. And though one glances at him briefly, then quickly away, there is no exchange, only the subtle language of posture and space. In the village, he is welcomed with a nod, the message received, and on the walk back, the sun begins to descend. The sky blooms into layered oranges and lavender. Birds swirl in low clusters, returning to roost. The shadows grow longer, and by the time he returns home, the fires are already lit, and the scent of roasted maize floats thick on the air. He joins his family for supper, once again sitting quietly, listening as the elders talk, their words careful, sometimes cryptic, often echoing things they said long ago. For teaching here is circular, not lecture, but layering repetition metaphor. After the meal, the warrior walks out beyond the last hut, alone for a moment with the sky, and he thinks, not about war, not about greatness, but about rhythm and duty and a strange calm that comes from knowing your place, not as limitation, but as purpose. He feels the world tilt toward night once more, and as the first stars blink into place, he returns to his hut, lies down on his mat, and lets the long breath of sleep pull him beneath the surface once again, the way his stone sinks slowly into a still pool. There are seasons in the Zulu Kingdom that do not announce themselves with dramatic weather or declarations from the sky, but instead shift subtly through the land's gestures. The angle of the sun at dusk, the way birds pause longer before taking flight, the heavier scent of the soil after brief rains. And the change is felt not as a disruption, but as a gentle hand pressing on the rhythm of daily life. And as this new season unfolds, the young warrior awakens with a sense of something old stirring again, not unfamiliar but newly present, like a forgotten name suddenly remembered in a dream. And outside his hut the mornings are a little wetter now, the grass damp for longer, the clouds hanging lower over the distant hills like thick gray cloth, and the cattle move slower in the crawl, their hooves sinking deeper into softened ground, their breaths heavier with steam. And it is in this kind of weather that rituals begin to take on added weight. Not because they change, but because people lean into them with more hunger, more attentiveness, as though sensing the invisible veil between the living and the ancestors has thinned just slightly. The warrior rises as he always does, slowly, thoughtfully, stretching beneath the domed roof of his hut before stepping into the brisk air that carries with it the scent of wood smoke and wild rosemary crushed underfoot, and he sees the women already at work rekindling the fire, voices low, fingers nimble, moving like dancers through their routines, and the men preparing tools for the work ahead, some shaping new spears, others patching the cracked wooden walls of storage huts, while elders sit beneath awnings made of woven reeds, watching, listening, not saying much, but noticing everything. Today is not for drills. It is for memory, for offerings, for the slow gathering of the community in preparation for the cleansing ceremony that follows the first harvest, and the air around the village seems to hum with quiet expectation. The warrior is tasked with helping gather branches for the central fire, not just any wood, but pieces from specific trees, ones whose bark gives off a fragrant smoke believed to carry messages to the ancestors, and he walks with 3 others through the dew-heavy undergrowth toward the grove beyond the western hill, their path marked only by the stories they remember, by the placement of stones that signal direction and intention. And as they walk, they speak not of ordinary things, but of dreams they've had recently, fragments of conversations with departed uncles, animals speaking in riddles, rivers flowing backward, dreams that are not laughed off but considered, examined, held up to the light like beads, because in this place, dreams matter. They are part of the map. They find the trees, harvest only what is needed, wrapping the bundles in dried reeds. And on the way back, they sing, not loudly, but in that half-humming way that makes the chest vibrate gently, songs that have no beginning or end, only middle, as though they've been humming since before birth and will continue long after they're gone. By midday, the village is rearranged. The usual paths are cleared. Children are kept closer to their mothers, and a large circle is swept clean near the center where elders will sit and where offerings will be placed on the raised platform woven from green branches and fresh earth. The warrior cleans himself again, this time not just with water, but with crushed herbs rubbed into his skin until he smells of sage and river mint, his chest marked lightly with white clay by an ant who speaks no words as she does so, only clicks her tongue 3 times in a rhythm that echoes deep in the bone. He dresses simply, a hide wrapped at the waist, a necklace of beads gifted by his grandmother before she passed, a bracelet made from woven copper that was said to belong to a cousin lost in battle long ago. There is no uniform here, no rigid costume, only symbols, only story. When the time comes, the people gather slowly, settling around the edges of the circle. Children at the front, then women, then younger men, then the elders behind them all, their posture tall despite their years, their eyes half-lidded but alert, and in the center stands the Isingoma, the spiritual healer, a woman of indeterminate age who seems to move without lifting her feet, her garments heavy with shells and beads and feathers, her face marked with ochre, her hair braided with tiny bones, said to carry ancestral whispers. And when she begins to speak, she does not raise her voice. She doesn't need to. Her words seem to move through the air like smoke, slow and curling, settling on each listener like dew. She speaks of the harvest, of those who died in the last season, of those born since then, of the balance that must be kept, not in coin or conquest, but in respect, in awareness, in continuity. The warrior listens, not with his mind, but with his chest, his breath slowing to match hers. And when she finishes, a slow chant begins, deep and low, more breath and sound, and offerings are brought forth. Gourds filled with milk, carved wooden figures, bundles of dried herbs, small lengths of woven cloth, all placed on the platform with careful hands. Then the fire is lit, not quickly, not with flint or spark stone, but with an ember brought from the Isingoma's hut, carried in a shell, cupped in her palms, and as the flame catches and begins to rise, the smoke thickens and begins to swirl skyward, carrying with it the prayers and promises and pain of the people gathered there. And the warrior watches the smoke as it twists into the air, feeling something shift inside him. An opening, a letting go, a listening. After the ceremony, the people return to their tasks, but more slowly, more deliberately, as though the ground has changed beneath them, and the warrior helps an elder to her feet, offering his arm, receiving a soft pat on the wrist in return. No words needed. He walks her to her hut, then pauses outside his own, sitting in the doorway, letting the sun warm his back, watching the clouds begin to gather on the eastern ridge. Later that day, the rain will come, not in anger, but in waves, soft and steady, drumming on the thatch, filling the water basins, painting the village in darker hues. But for now, the air is still, and he rests. He closes his eyes briefly, and in that moment of quiet, the entire village seems to breathe with him, a slow inhale of presence, of memory, of earth. It is not always about battle. It is not always about strength. Sometimes being a warrior means listening, pausing, returning again and again to the center of the circle, and remembering that you belong to something older than yourself, something that whispers through the trees, hums in the fire, and walks with you, always in silence. There's a truth understood without speaking among the Zulu warriors, a quiet inheritance that needs no announcement nor carved stone to mark its boundary. And it is this, that the land is not a backdrop, not a passive shape, but a living ancestor. And the warrior learns this not from books or proclamations, but from the way the earth receives his footsteps each morning, from the path his mother sweeps clean, not because of dust, but because sweeping is remembering, from the shape of hills that echo back not just voices but names, and the way the river bends like an elbow where an ancestor once knelt. And on this morning, as the sky carries a dull orange glow, neither stormy nor clear, the warrior walks along the edge of the maize field where dew clings to every leaf like glass beads, his spear not in his hand but strapped to his back, his shoulders bare, arms brushing softly against the tall stalks. And with each step, he feels the quiet press of memory. The way his grandfather once stood right here and pointed to the same mountain and said, "That one listens when you speak to it." And even though he was only a child then, the words stayed, rooted like wild aloe, growing quietly each year until they became. Hard as thinking. The land has moods. This is understood. And those moods are watched as carefully as cattle are counted. When the wind curves westward too early, when ants build higher walls on their hills, when owls call in threes before sundown, when dogs bark at the empty road and fall silent too soon. These are not superstitions, not decorations of thought, but signals woven into daily life. And the warrior, like all who are raised among the ridges and gullies, knows how to read them, not as predictions, but as reminders to act with care, to move with presence, to speak only what is needed. Today is one of those days when the land feels heavy, not angry, but full, as if it holds its breath. And so the warrior adjusts his stride, slows his movements, speaks little. He helps tether a young calf beside the cattle pen, the rope tied with a looping not taught to him by his cousin who once saved a bull from breaking free during a festival. And as his fingers move, the texture of the braided rope is familiar, rough but soft with use, smelling faintly of sweat, dust, and wood smoke. And once the task is done, he stands back and watches the animals breathe, the large ones exhaling mist, the smaller ones twitching their ears at invisible flies. His friend joins him, saying nothing, just standing beside him in the kind of silence that does not demand filling, and together they watch the far hill where trees grow in tight clusters. Those trees are said to be the place where dreams go when they leave a body, or resting ground for memories too strong for sleep. And while no one goes there alone, the place is not feared, only respected. As the sun rises, they return to the inner compound where the older warriors are preparing for a boundary walk, a slow patrol of the outer fields and pastures, more symbolic than strategic, but essential in its rhythm. For to walk the land is to renew one's claim to it, not as possession, but as belonging, and the warrior is invited to join. They walk in pairs or small groups, each taking a direction, some toward the dried stream beds, others along the thorn fence, and the warrior finds himself heading east with a man who once fought in the king's personal regiment, and who now walks with a slight limp, but speaks of battle as one might speak of a distant storm. Important to remember, but not to chase. They pass termite mounds the size of huts, their sides marked with the scratches of pangolins who visit at night, and they pass baobab trees with hollow trunks large enough to step inside, trees so old that their bark folds like an elder's face and their roots reach down to drink from the bones of the earth. As they walk, the older man points things out with simple words. Here, the hare crosses. There, the jackal called Last Moon. See the stones? Someone move them. And the warrior listens, nods, not interrupting, absorbing the terrain not as geography, but as story. They find a boundary marker, 3 stones stacked, slightly shifted, and the older man adjusts them back into place with the heel of his foot, not out of fear of trespass, but out of habit, of duty, of ritual. On the walk back, they pause near a grove where the wind is always different, where it circles rather than passes. And the older man says this is where the ancestors gather before big storms. And though the warrior sees nothing, hears nothing beyond the rustling of leaves, he feels a stillness that is not empty. When they return to the village, the sun is high and the day has taken on the slow tempo of early afternoon. Women prepare sour porridge under shaded overhangs. Men check the thatching on roofs. Children nap in clusters, their legs tangled, heads resting on siblings' bellies, and a warrior drinks deeply from a calabash of thick water flavored with bark shavings that keep it cool and safe, then sits with his back against the outer wall of his hut, eyes closed, the sounds around him folding, together like fabric, talking, chopping, the occasional rustle of grass stirred by passing chickens. Later, he visits his great aunt whose legs are too swollen to leave her hut anymore, but whose mind is sharp, and she asks him questions, not about his training or his strength, but about what he's seen, what he's noticed. Did the owls call last night? Were the ants on the eastern slope or the west? What did the moon look like just before it disappeared? And he answers carefully, not to impress, but to honor her memory of the patterns that shape their world. She nods slowly, chews something bitter, then tells him a story of the mountain that sleeps and the boy who sang it awake. And though he's heard the tale before, he listens as if it's new, because every telling adds a layer. Every detail shifts with age and voice. As dusk returns, the warrior helps build a small cooking fire, arranges sticks in a triangle, coaxes the flame from ember, and the smoke begins to rise, wrapping around him like an old shawl. He eats with his family, the food seasoned with fermented herbs and the soft sweetness of roasted pumpkin. And after, he does not speak much, only listens as his father speaks of cattle prices from the last trade, of a neighbor's son who may join the regiment soon, of a dream he had where a lion stood in the doorway, but did not enter. The night deepens. Crickets begin their steady singing. A dog barks once, then is quiet, and the warrior walks one more time beyond the huts, down the narrow path between 2 tall shrubs, and stand where the field opens up wide beneath the stars. He does not look for signs now. He simply stands, feeling the ground beneath him like a heartbeat, knowing that everything he is, his name, his spear, his posture, his story, is shaped not only by people, but by place, and that the hills and trees and wind will remember him long after he is gone. There are times when the strength of a warrior is not in his arms or legs or the quickness of his reaction, but in the stillness of his listening, in the patience of his silence, in the way he holds a story in his chest like a second heartbeat. And today is a day given to listening, to speech not shouted or performed, but passed carefully from one tongue to another. And the young warrior begins his morning not with drills or walking the boundary paths, but seated cross-legged on a woven mat inside the great hut of the Nkosi, the head of the homestead, where men gather not to plan for war or arrange alliances, but to speak and be heard, to sit with stories, with memory, with questions, and the warrior sits near the back, Beneath the carved beam shaped like a giraffe's neck, his head bowed slightly, his hands resting on his knees, and his eyes flicking now and then to the face of the storyteller seated in the center, an old man with white stubble on his chin, whose voice never rises above the sound of rustling grass, but who commands attention with the way he pauses, with the way his breath seems to draw the air around him closer before he begins. And he speaks of a time before the warrior's grandfather was born, when the rains failed and the cattle wandered, and people feared that the ancestors had turned their faces away. And a boy no older than the warrior now was sent alone into the hills with nothing but a gourd of water, a small drum, and the name of a forgotten ancestor to speak at the stone altar, buried under thorns. And the boy returned 3 days later with no memory of what he saw. But the rains came back the following morning, and from then on, he was treated as one touched by the spirits, though he never spoke again. The men around the circle murmur softly, not with disbelief, but with recognition, because stories here are not judged for fact or fiction. They are measured by the way they settle in the soul, by the way they ripple through the silence afterward. And the warrior feels the weight of that silence, lets it enter him, lets it rest on his chest like a sleeping cat. The next speaker is younger, a man in his middle years with arms strong from farming and a voice like the low rattle of a gourd filled with seeds. And he speaks of his daughter, how she dreams of becoming a healer, how she listens to trees and mimics bird calls and knows which plants make fevers break. And he speaks not to boast, but to ask what should be done when a child's gift speaks louder than the path lay before her. And again the room is quiet, not to judge, but to think. And the Nkosi nods slowly, his eyes closed as though listening to a voice that rises from within the floor itself. And when he does respond, his words are sparse, like stones carefully placed in a circle. The path finds the child who is willing to walk with it. No one claps, no one interrupts. It is enough. The warrior shifts slightly, feeling the dust beneath the mat press into his ankles, the soft breeze from the doorway cooling the back of his neck. And he thinks of his own sister, just 9 seasons old, who dances in circles and hums to herself in the early morning before anyone else is awake. And he wonders what path is waiting for her, what gift she is yet to name. After the gathering disperses, he walks back toward the river, taking the long path that winds through a line of flowering trees whose scent is strongest in this season, sweet and earthy, with petals the color of rusted iron and sap that sticks to the fingers. And he walks slowly, tracing his hand along the trunks, letting the stickiness catch on his palm. And he remembers another story told by his mother when he was small, of a woman who fell in love with a river spirit and bore a child who could hear thunder before it arrived. And though the story was told to make him sleep, it has stayed with him like a shadow that softens rather than frightens. And as he walks now, he imagines the river listening to his footsteps, remembers how water here is not just for drinking, but for speaking, for washing away old thoughts, for carrying names to distant places. He stops to fill his gourd, crouching low, watching his own reflection ripple outward, and for a moment he lets his hand rest on the surface, the cold biting his fingertips, the current tugging gently, and it feels like holding a hand made of memory. He carries the water back, not quickly, but in a meandering loop, stopping once to watch a bird dig its beak into the dry soil, once more to chase a goat that has wandered too far, laughing softly as the animal hops and protests. And when he returns to the village, the sun is already leaning towards western bed, the sky a dull brass bowl tipped over the ridges. Children are playing a game near the kraal, using pebbles and claps to keep score, and the warrior pauses to watch, smiling as one girl pretends to be an elder settling a dispute, scolding 2 imaginary men who bow in apology, her small voice commanding and her eyes bright with invention. He continues toward his hut, but is stopped by his uncle, who invites him to sit beside the fire and share a story of his own. Something you've seen, the uncle says, or something you hope to see. And though the warrior feels a flutter of hesitation, he agrees, sitting slowly, gazing into the flames as if the words might rise from the ash, and he begins to speak, not loudly, not confidently, but truthfully, about a time he sat beneath the fig tree during a storm and felt as if the roots beneath him were speaking in sighs. And he says he felt no fear, only stillness, only the sense that someone was listening. And when he finishes, his uncle does not praise or dismiss, only nods and tosses another twig into the fire. And they sit in companionable quiet until the sky dims and the goats are called home and the smell of roasted marrowbone drifts through the air like a lullaby. That night, the warrior lies on his mat longer than usual before sleep finds him, listening not to the sounds outside, crickets, distant drums, the shuffle of feet on dust, but to the silence inside, the long, slow echo of a story told and received. And in that silence he finds peace, not because everything is known, but because nothing needs to be. There are days in the warrior's life that carry no ceremony, no lesson wrapped in chant or parable, and yet they linger longer than the grandest of battles or the most stirring of harvest feasts. And today is one such day, shaped not by any great event, but by the quiet accumulation of gestures between brothers. Not brothers by blood, but by bond, forged in sweat, in laughter behind the thatched walls, in the long hours of carrying water, in the bruises earned during mock combat, and this. Morning the warrior rises to such a day, feeling its quiet stillness even before he lifts the mat from his body, even before the faint pre-dawn smoke of early cook fires wafts through the gap in the hut wall, and he sits for a while in the half-darkness, rubbing his eyes slowly, listening to the soft rustling of someone sweeping outside, the rhythmic brushing that signals the beginning of another day woven in the same patient thread as the last. And he reaches for his water gourd, sipping slowly, letting the coolness settle his thoughts before he moves. When he steps outside, the light is soft and gray, the kind of light that doesn't press but invites, and the village is still mostly asleep except for a few women tending to cooking stones, a child tying string around a stick to mimic a bow, and two dogs stretched out in the dust, their chests rising and falling with the ease of beings who live by the sun. He nods a silent greeting to the old man who watches the cattle, and makes his way down to the stream, where he will meet his closest companion, Mandla, a fellow warrior with whom he has trained since their first year in the regiment, whose laugh is low and slow, who speaks little but notices much, and who once carried the warrior on his back for a mile after he sprained his ankle chasing a runaway calf. At the water's edge, Mandla is already waiting, seated on a rock smoothed by time and water, tossing pebbles across the surface in slow arcs. And without words the warrior joins him, pulling off his sandals, stepping into the cold stream, the water rising to his calves and sending a tremor up his legs, and he washes his arms, his face, then cups water to drink, while Mandla continues tossing stones, each one skipping fewer times than the last, until the final one sinks with a satisfying plop. They exchange a glance, a slight smile, and begin walking together toward the outer pastures, their task today being to repair a section of fencing damaged by wind or cattle or perhaps simply time. And though the walk is long and the sun now peaks over the hills in a quiet blaze, they move slowly, side by side, their feet pressing the same worn track, speaking only once when Mandla points to a bird and says, "It sings like the one from your mother's story," to which the warrior nods and replies, "Maybe it followed me here, and that is enough." When they reach the fence, they begin their work without assigning roles, one gathering fallen branches, the other sharpening stakes, both slipping into the rhythm of labor that needs no conversation, only motion, breath, and the occasional shared glance when a tool is misplaced or a hand needs steadying. And as they work, they hum, not a tune with words, but a shared thrum in the throat, like the low vibration of bees or the rattle of seeds in a dried pod. And this hum rises and falls with the movement of their hands, the strike of wood, the tension of the rope, until the fence stands again, Not perfect, but strong, and they sit back on their heels, looking at it as if it were a painting signed only by sweat. They rest in the grass, chewing small leaves that taste bitter and sharp, good for the teeth, and Mamla tells a story, not from memory but invented on the spot, of a goat who outwits a leopard by disguising himself as a crocodile. And though the logic makes no sense, they both laugh, not because the tale is clever, but because it is offered freely, a gift wrapped in dust and breath. After a time, they begin to walk back, shoulders sore but hearts light, and the path winds past the termite mound shaped like a seated lion, and past the lone fig tree that leans so far east it looks ready to fall, and they pause there in the shade of that fig, where the air smells sweet and damp, and they sit again, saying nothing, only watching the ants carry their tiny burdens up and down the bark, and the warrior thinks, not for the first time, that it is this, not the sword or the march or the chant, that teaches a man how to be steady. The patient work, the shared silence, the mutual knowing that passes between two people who have seen each other weep and bleed and shiver. When they return, the sun is near its highest point, and the village hums with midday sounds. Children arguing over whose turn it is to grind maize. A woman singing a lullaby to a baby half asleep on her back. The creaking of a gate as goats are released to graze. And they're greeted not with cheers or applause, but with nods, with brief touches to the shoulder, with a bowl of cool water passed wordlessly into their hands. And this, too, is enough. The afternoon drifts by slowly, as afternoons do, and the warrior finds himself seated beneath his grandmother's awning, helping her sort dried beans, his fingers moving with the same care she used when combing his hair as a boy. And she tells him about a time when warriors did not wear beads, but colored their arms with ochre and ash, and how laughter was once considered a form of protection against sickness, and how Manla's father used to walk barefoot for days just to hear a certain songbird whose call he claimed cured headaches. And the warrior listens, not because he must, but because her voice is the sound of roots growing under the floor of the hut, steady and deep. As the sky begins to turn from gold to rose, and the light becomes longer and more forgiving, the warrior and Manla meet again, this time with others, gathering in the training field. Not for combat, but for a shared game that mimics battle but ends in laughter, a dance of shields and sticks and stomping feet, where boys learn balance and timing, and elders shout mock orders from the sidelines, and the air is full of dust and cheer. And as the sun dips low, casting long shadows that stretch, like arms across the field, the warrior feels a lightness in his chest that has nothing to do with victory and everything to do with belonging. That night, as the moon rises behind the ridge and the stars stitch themselves into familiar constellations above, the warrior lies on his mat, listening to the wind tease the edges of the thatched roof. And he thinks of Manla's crooked grin, of the rhythm they share when working without speech, of the story spun beneath trees, and he realizes that strength is not only in how one stands or how one fights, but in the quiet bonds built over years, in the way two hands know how to build a fence. Together, in how one glance can speak volumes. And he falls asleep not with a heart racing, but with one that beats slow, steady, sure. In the stillness between breath and memory. In the slow unfolding of days when the sky seems to hold its light just a little longer than expected, the warrior comes to understand something deeper than drills or duty. He begins to feel the quiet pull of the spiritual thread that ties all living things to the past and to the unseen world beyond the tall grasses, beyond the fire's reach. And it is not taught in loud voices or engraved in stone, but whispered in how water gathers at the edges of sleeping places, in how birds fly lower before the ancestors walk through dreams, and in how the air feels thicker on mornings when offerings are made. And this morning begins with such a thickness, not heavy or frightening, but full, like the pause before a drumbeat. And a warrior rises slowly, washing not just his body but his hands and feet more carefully than usual, using the rough leaves given to him last season by the Isangoma, the spiritual medium who tends the dream paths of the village. And as he rinses them in cool water for the calabash pot beside the hut, he murmurs a name, not his own, not even one he remembers from story, but a name that came to him in a dream 2 nights ago, spoken by a voice that did not feel human, yet filled him with warmth. And this act, quiet and unfinished, is enough to begin the day in alignment. Outside, the village moves slowly, not sluggish but deliberate, like everyone feels the same invisible hand pressing gently on the shoulders. And in the distance, a goat bleats twice in short, clipped bursts, and the elder who hears it stops briefly in her sweeping, nodding to herself before continuing, as if she has heard confirmation of something she expected. The warrior eats little this morning, a few bites of boiled pumpkin, a sip of sour milk, and then he walks toward the stone circle near the edge of the village where ancestors are remembered, not in statues or monuments, but in gesture, in silence, in ritual that flows like water from the oldest to the youngest. And he kneels there, not as an act of submission, but as recognition, tracing the worn marks in the stones where fingers have passed over generations. And he places a sprig of green tobacco there, not because he smokes, but because it is said that the smoke of this leaf pleases the ones who walk with us unseen. And he whispers again, not for effect, not for others, but because words must be spoken to travel, and the breath that carries them is sacred. Later, he helps prepare for the small ritual that will mark the midpoint between seasons, the quiet honoring of the spirits who keep balance in the soil and blood. And he joins 3 other warriors and 1 elder in gathering white ash from the previous fire, which must be mixed with river clay and spread in small patterns across the outer doorways of the huts. And as he mixes the ash, his fingers turning pale with powder, he remembers a story told when he was small, of how ash carries memory, how it holds the essence of the fire's last breath, and how, when scattered properly, it speaks in symbols only the ancestors truly understand. As he applies the mixture to the doorways, he does so slowly, each stroke purposeful, not ornamental, but meaningful. And he does not speak while working, for silence during sacred marking is not only tradition, it is necessary. And as the patterns take shape, circles, arcs, spirals, he feels something in his chest loosen, as if a thread pulled taut is finally relaxing. The sun is high by the time they finish, and the elder leading the ritual thanks them not with words but with a steady gaze and a slow wave of her hand toward the hills, which means they are dismissed to walk, to reflect, to realign their steps with the land. So the warrior walks, not fast, not far, only along the path that leads past the termite mound shaped like a sleeping child, down to the grove where birds gather at this hour to chatter and cleanse themselves in the dust. And he sits beneath a tree with wide arms and shade that flickers like breath, and he closes his eyes and listens. Not to the birds, not to the wind, but to the space between them, the silence that lies beneath all sound. And in that silence, he sees again the face from his dream, a figure made of cloud and root, who looked at him without eyes, but with knowing, and he wonders, was it a visitor from beyond, or was it a shape drawn from his own longing? The line, he knows, is thin. The sun begins to lean west, and he walks back slowly, past a field where 2 children are collecting dry pods, past a bent tree said to grant safe travel when its bark is touched, and as he returns to the village, the air feels lighter, as though the veil has lifted and preparations for the evening's cleansing fire are underway. The warriors gather not to fight, but to witness, to hold presence as the fire is lit. Not with flint or spark stone, but with coals carried from the sacred hearth, protected in a clay bowl wrapped in bark, and the flame is nursed until it rises, slow and sure. And into this fire are placed old cloth, broken tools, the feather of a bird found dead at the river's bend, and each item carries weight, not for what it is, but for what it has held, what it now releases, and the smoke that rises is thick and fragrant, filled with dried roots and scented resins, and it curls around the gathered figures like a cloak. The warrior stands still, eyes half-lidded, letting the smoke brush over his face, and he remembers his mother saying that smoke knows your name even if you've forgotten it, and he feels calm. Not joy, not sorrow, but stillness, the kind that hums deep in the bones. As the fire dies to embers, an elder speaks, not to instruct but to thank, to name those who came before, to ask for guidance that need not come in words. And as the names are spoken, some familiar, some ancient, the warrior feels each one like a pebble dropped gently into water, sending ripples across the still pool of his thoughts. Later, as stars emerge one by one and the air turns cool and weightless, the warrior sits alone by the ashes, tracing patterns with a stick, shapes with no purpose but movement, and he feels something shift inside. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but like a door creaking open just enough to see a sliver of light. And he understands that being a warrior is not just about readiness or endurance, but about remembering that you are never alone, that every footstep is taken beside those who came before, that every breath is borrowed from the wind that once filled your great-grandfather's lungs, and every fear is held in a hand older than fear itself. He looks up to the stars, not to seek omens, not tonight, but to simply witness, to let his eyes rest in the vastness above, and the thought comes to him not in words, but in a feeling as old as soil. To walk with grace, one must remember the world is watching kindly. There are days when the warrior wakes, not because of the sun's warmth or the smell of fire smoke curling in through the cracks of his hut, but because of sound, soft at first, like the low murmur of a river behind a veil, and then growing in form, not louder but clearer, as if the day itself is beginning with a song. And indeed, it is an early chant carried by the wind from a neighboring homestead, the voice of a woman drawing water while humming a tune she likely learned from her mother, and her mother before her, and the warrior lies still on his sleeping mat, eyes closed, letting the sound find its shape inside his body, each note rising like breath, falling like memory, and for a long moment he simply listens, not as an act of idleness, but because he must, for in this land, in this life, listening is living, and every melody is a map to something older than language. When he rises, the chant is fading, but its rhythm follows him into the morning, into the wash basin where he rinses his face with cold water, into the scrape of the clay, jug across the earth as he moves it to catch more sun, into the soft thump of his sandals against the dirt path leading toward the cattle kraal. All around him, the day is full of sound. Not noise, but tone, texture, pattern. The bleat of a young goat calling for its mother. The cough of an elder warming her voice before storytelling. The rattle of gourds hung from the rafters, stirred by a breeze that dances only in corners. The warrior meets Manla near the training grounds, and without speaking they begin a routine of stretching in mock forms, their movements punctuated by the soft exhale of effort and the rhythmic slap of feet against the hard-packed soil, and though no drum is present, they move as if there is one, their bodies in time with a beat carried not by instrument, but by habit and memory. Rhythm, he knows, must be kept, not forced, not chased, but invited as one would invite a familiar guest to sit beside the fire. And that sense of rhythm seeps into all things, into how a spear is gripped, into how a shield is lifted, into how the heart slows before battle, and how the lungs expand when walking up a long hill at dusk. When the training ends, the younger boys take the field, practicing a game of sticks and dodging, and their shouts rise in uneven tones, joyous and sharp, and one sings a taunt in a high, teasing falsetto, making the others laugh and chase him, and even their mock chaos has a kind of structure, a music of its own. The warrior and Manla sit under the fig tree again, sharing roasted cassava wrapped in leaves, and Manla hums a fragment of a war song they once learned. just 2 lines repeated over and over, until the tune lodges behind the warrior's eyes like light on water. And they sit that way for a while, not talking, not needing to, because the song fills the space between them, saying all that must be said. Later, the warrior is called to help with the reed cutting, a task that seems simple but must be done with care, for not all reeds are the same, and the wrong cut can splinter the stem and render it useless for weaving. And so they walk down to the marshy edge where frogs call out in rapid pulses, where dragonflies skip in tight circles, and the reeds sway in a soft hissing sound, a whisper made by thousands of slender bodies leaning together. And as the group begins cutting, they sing, not loud, not to perform, but to guide the rhythm of the work, a repetitive tune that aligns with the movement of hand and blade. And as the warrior sings, he feels the tension in his shoulders ease, the motion becoming effortless, the reeds falling in time with the melody. And for a while he forgets the task itself, only aware of how good it feels to move in time with others, to breathe together, to sing together, to make work into music. They return with bundles tied tight, and as the sun leans westward, the women gather to begin weaving mats for sleeping and for ceremonies. And their fingers move in patterns known not by sight, but by feel, the same rhythm their grandmothers knew. And they hum as they work, small sounds, tuneless to outsiders perhaps, but full of shape and rise and loop. And the warrior sits nearby, not weaving, but listening, letting the sound become part of the dusk. A boy plays a simple flute near the fire, repeating the same sequence of notes again and again, and a baby nearby falls asleep to it, eyelids fluttering like moth wings. As night fully arrives, the central fire is lit and the elders begin their chant, a low, droning invocation that gathers everyone's attention without demanding it. And one by one, people draw near, some seated, some standing, all held in the gentle gravity of voice. The chant is not complex. It is not a performance. It is breath shaped into belonging. It begins in the chest, drops into the belly, then rises into the throat and out through the lips and long. Even tones that mirror the sway of tall grass and wind. And the warrior joins, matching pitch, finding his place in the weave of voices. And as he sings, he feels as if his breath stretches beyond his own skin, reaching through time, touching others who once sat where he now sits. The drum is brought out, just one, its head taut, its frame polished by decades of palms. And it is played not in frenzy, but in heartbeat, a slow rhythm that echoes inside the ribs. And with it comes motion, not dance yet, but the beginning of it, the rocking of shoulders, the stamping of feet, the subtle arc of hips. And eventually the warrior rises with the others and moves, not with the precision of combat training, but with the joy of being part of something unbroken. And the night becomes soft with rhythm, with story, with the deep pleasure of sound shared and sustained. When it ends, the fire is low, and the warrior returns to his hut, his muscles warm, his breath even, and he lies on his mat with the sound of the drum still pulsing in his bones, the chant still lingering in his ears, the rhythm of the weaving still flickering behind his eyes, and he realizes that music in his world is not something added to life. It is life. It is the pattern that makes walking, working, waiting, and waking into something beautiful, something remembered. He closes his eyes, the silence now filled with all the sounds of the day, and as he drifts towards sleep, he hears Manla's humming again, that same fragment from earlier, looping gently, like a lullaby passed from dusk to dawn. In the quiet that follows, his last thought is not a word, not a prayer, but a rhythm, steady, slow, eternal. There is a different kind of silence that lives inside the workshop, not the hush of sleep or the stillness of ritual, but the focused quiet that comes when hands are busy shaping the world into something more useful, more durable, more true. And this morning, the warrior rises early not to walk the training field or sit beneath the fig tree, but to join his uncle in the shade of the crafting hut, where leather is stretched, iron is tempered, and wood is shaved so thin it curls like dried petals. And even before the sun has crested the horizon, the smell of tannins and charcoal already hangs in the air, sharp and honest, and the warrior pauses to breathe it in, to let it fill his chest, for he knows that this scent, like fire smoke and wet dust, marks a day that will end with something newly made. Inside the workshop, the tools are not stored neatly, but with familiarity, resting in hollows worn into benches and grooves carved into walls by years of repetition. And his uncle greets him not with words, but with a raised chin and a hand gesture toward the low stool beside the high drum. And the warrior understands. Today they will rewrap spear shafts and prepare fresh slings. And while the task may seem small, it is one that must be done with care, for a frayed strap or loose head can mean more than inconvenience in the field. It can mean failure, injury, or even death. And so the work begins slowly, not rushed, each step a quiet conversation between palm and material. The warrior selects a shaft, running his fingers along the grain of the wood, feeling for any slight ridge or warp, and he begins to strip the old binding away, unwinding it with small, steady pulls, while his uncle works beside him, sharpening a set of arrowheads on a slab of stone smoothed by decades of use. And the only sounds in a room are the scrape of steel on stone, the creak of wood, and the low, rhythmic tapping of bone needles piercing hide. Outside, children's laughter floats on the breeze, and occasionally, a goat will bleat in protest or a chicken will rustle the thatch in search of shade. But here, the world narrows to motion and intention, and hours pass in this steady, shared silence. The warrior begins wrapping the new leather cord around the spear shaft, keeping the tension even, the spacing precise, tucking each loop under the next like a heartbeat nested in muscle. And his uncle glances over, nodding once, not praise but acknowledgement, and returns to his own work. By midday, the warrior's hands ache with effort, but he feels a slow satisfaction bloom in his chest, a feeling not unlike the calm after rain, when all things feel cleaner, more possible, and they step outside to rest, sitting beneath the long eaves, drinking sour milk and eating flat cakes pressed with herbs, their silence now companionable, their movements relaxed. The uncle breaks it only to say, a man must not only use what is given, but learn to give it shape. And though the words are few, they settle deep into the warrior's bones, because they speak not just of tools, but of life itself. In the afternoon, they return to the hut and begin the more delicate task of etching patterns into a new shield frame, tracing lines passed down from old regiments, symbols of thunder, of vigilance, of protection, and the warrior holds the blade lightly, carving with care, not for decoration, but for memory, for identity, for the invisible thread that ties one generation to the next. The light in the hut softens with the descending sun, and shadows stretch long across the floor, catching on every groove and curl of wood, and still they work quietly, steadily, until the new spears are lined up like sentinels along the wall, the leather bindings dark and tight, the heads gleaming faintly in the fading light, and the shield's face is smooth and symmetrical, its frame strong enough to resist both rain and blade. They clean the tools together, brushing filings from the sharpening stone, oiling the hinges of the tongs, folding the leftover hide for storage, and it is only then that the uncle finally speaks again, sharing a memory of his own youth, when he broke a spear during training and wept not because of the failure, but because he realized he had not understood the work that went into the making of it. And the warrior listens with respect, the story not a lesson, but a seed. As evening falls and the sky blushes with the last light of day, the warrior returns to his hut carrying the repaired weapons, and he lays them carefully beside his sleeping mat, not out of vanity, but reverence, for he knows that each object has passed through time and skill and must be honored as such. Later, he walks the perimeter of the village slowly, as is his habit before night settles in full, and the breeze is soft, carrying the distant clack of beads, the echo of someone sharpening grain, and the low hum of a lullaby sung in an elder's throat, and he watches the shadows cast by the new moon stretch and blur across the packed ground. And he thinks not of war or glory or discipline, but of hands. Hands shaping, hands smoothing, hands knowing. And he realizes that part of being a warrior is understanding what must be done when no one is looking, when no one will sing your name for it, because this too is strength. The quiet labor of preparation, the respect for the object before it becomes a symbol, the willingness to bend toward creation instead of destruction. He returns to his mat, feeling grounded, his body tired but not drained, and he lies down beside the spear he repaired earlier, his fingers brushing the grip, and he closes his eyes with the sense that something invisible has aligned, as if he too has been sharpened, bound, and made ready, not for battle, but for being, and in that readiness, he finds peace. There are days when the village seems to breathe with the land rather than upon it, when the bird song is not just background but a form of language, when the wind that moves the tall grass seems to carry a kind of message too soft to catch but too steady to ignore. It is on such a morning that the warrior feels the familiar pull toward the wooded edge beyond the training fields, not because he is required to go, not because of duty or chore, but because he must. For nature to him is not simply the scenery of his life, but the elder of all his teachers, a presence more ancient than the oldest storyteller, more enduring than any. Carved name, and so he rises early, his breath visible in the cool air, his body still relaxed from sleep, and sets out barefoot, his steps light on the morning earth, moving away from the huts and smoke and toward the rustling hush of the forest line, where light breaks gently through leaves and the ground softens beneath a carpet of old bark and fallen pods. And as he walks deeper into the trees, every part of him begins to slow, not out of fatigue, but reverence. For here, each step must be given rather than taken, each sound considered, each breath drawn as if asking permission. The path is one he knows not by sight, but by feel. A trail that twists gently around thickets and fallen branches, and the air is heavy with the scent of damp lichen, old wood, and a sweetness that rises from blooming wild ginger hidden beneath the undergrowth. And he listens, not for danger, not for others, but for the rhythm of the place itself. The click-click of beetles burrowing under bark, the drip of dew from leaf to leaf, the faint creak of branches shifting in a breeze that does not reach the village. In the clearing where the light pools like spilled milk, he pauses beside an old fig tree whose roots twist out of the earth like resting serpents, and he places a hand upon its bark, the texture rough and ancient. And in that moment, he remembers something his grandfather once said during a thunderstorm, that trees do not just live among us, they remember us, that each time we pass beneath their shade, they make a mark of us in the shape of our scent, our vibration, our intent. And so the warrior lingers hand against the bark, whispering a greeting not in words but in breath. From here he follows the stream that cuts through the lowland, its banks dotted with small stones rounded smooth by time and water, and he walks beside it carefully, not disturbing the frogs sunning themselves, or the heron still as bone on a tall-legged hunt, and the sounds here shift into a kind of rhythm he knows well. The gurgle of water over rock, the soft hiss of grass swept by current, the sudden snap of a twig in the distance. Not threatening, only reminding. He stops by the place where the stream pools deep enough for a wash, and kneels there, cupping water to his face, its chill sharpening his senses, and he drinks slowly, feeling the cool spread inward. And he notices how even the insects here move in harmony, how the ants march in patient lines across the exposed roots, how the butterflies dance like petals on wind. And he wonders, not for the first time, how many of nature's secrets the ancestors once knew, but kept unwritten, passed only, through gesture and practice. He moves on, deeper into the forest where the trees grow taller, the canopy tighter, and the light softens to a greenish hue. And here the silence changes again. Not emptiness, but depth, a silence thick with presence, as though something listens back, and the warrior slows further, his breath steady, his senses wide, and he begins to see signs. Not just tracks in the dirt or scratchings on bark, but subtle messages. A bird's sudden flight, the angle of a broken twig, the pattern of fungus, growing in a spiral on a log. And he knows to read these things not with the eyes alone, but with the memory of those who walked before him. Because to survive, a warrior must be part hunter, part tracker, part dreamer. And it is here in this space between wilderness and spirit that all those parts meet. He comes to the place where the beehive tree stands, a gnarled sentinel buzzing faintly with life. And he does not approach too closely, only kneels nearby and listens. For bees are not only givers of sweetness and wax, but keepers of warning, and their patterns, when they fly, how they move, often mirror unseen shifts in the world around. And as he watches them swirl like smoke in golden arcs, he feels the hum of the forest enter his body, not just through his ears, but through his bones, through his breath. And he realizes how much time must pass before one fully hears what the land is saying. The sun now filters in diagonally, and small shafts of light catch on tiny airborne seeds drifting through the air, each one moving like it has a story. And he sits on a flat stone, cross-legged, eyes half closed, and simply remains, not meditating the sense taught by ritual, but listening, observing, becoming smaller inside himself, a quiet guest in the cathedral of trees. Time slows further, and for a while he hears nothing but the forest breathing around him, until a rustle, sudden yet smooth, draws his attention to a pair of duikers stepping into view, delicate creatures with alert ears and bright eyes, and they freeze when they see him. And he does not move, not even to blink, and the stillness becomes a kind of agreement. I am here, and so are you, and nothing more must happen. They dart away, soundless, and he smiles faintly, grateful. As the light begins to soften into the colors of approaching evening, he makes his way back slowly, taking a different path now, one that curves along the hill's edge where tall grass waves in golden swells. And from this vantage, he can see the smoke of the village curling skyward, faint and silvery, like the memory of a dream. And he knows he must return soon, but not yet. He lingers on the ridge, letting the wind move through his hair, his fingertips brushing the seed heads of grasses that will soon dry and scatter. And he thinks about the cycle, how nothing in this land is rushed, how every creature, every plant, even the stones beneath his feet, move at a rhythm too slow for impatience. By the time he descends the hill and walks the last path toward home, the sky is deepening, the birds settling, and the air carries the scent of evening cook fires, meat roasting, herbs steaming, maize bubbling. And the warrior knows that tomorrow he may train, he may mend, he may lead or follow, but today he has learned from the forest, and that lesson must be kept, not retold, but absorbed, and in that quiet holding. He steps across the village threshold, his feet dusty, his mind calm, his spirit anchored like a seed finally at rest in soil that remembers. There is a softness to the evening that comes only after a day well lived, a kind of ease that settles not just into the muscles, but into the very pace of thought. And tonight, as the warrior returns from the fields, from the woods, from the still language of nature, he finds his heart quiet, his breath steady, and his steps light. And as he approaches the heart of the village, he sees again how deeply the threads of kinship are woven into the fabric of Zulu life. Here, where age is not a distance to be crossed, but a source of gravity, where children move like sparks among the coals of conversation, listened to and teased and corrected not just by parents, but by all, and where elders are not retired but rerouted, their presence like ancient trees around which everything grows. And as he passes through the outer circle of homes, the warrior slows, stopping to nod to a mother balancing a basket of meal on her hip, her baby slung on her back, the child peeking over her shoulder with wide, curious eyes, and the mother smiles, offering him a roasted nut with emotion so practiced it seems effortless. and he accepts it with a bowed head, not out of hunger but gratitude. For such offerings are not about sustenance, but about presence. They say, I see you, I honor your being. Here, and this, the warrior knows, must be answered with gentleness, never dismissed, and he continues on, drawn by the rising hum of voices, the scent of shared food, and the flickering light of communal fires that dance like eyes between shadows. The warriors have gathered, some seated, some standing, all in that loose constellation that forms not by rule, but by rhythm. And there is no leader tonight, no drill, only fellowship. And the talk is easy. Memories of hunts, of close calls and storms, of dreams half remembered but retold for the joy of their odd shapes. And the warrior eases into a seat, accepting a gourd of sweet beer passed from one to the next, its rim still warm from another's lips. And he drinks slowly, not for the taste, alone but for the continuity, the way each sip binds him into a moment older than speech. Laughter comes often here, not loud but deep, shared in the belly and behind the eyes, and he watches as one of the younger men, still not fully grown, attempts an imitation of an elder's heavy walk, his limbs exaggerated, his voice creaky, and the circle erupts in warm approval, the elder himself cackling the loudest, clapping his knee and throwing his head back in delight. And it reminds the warrior of his own first attempts at such mischief, the way he too once played the fool to earn a place in the company of men. And he realizes with a gentle surprise how much time has passed, how slowly and suddenly one becomes the one others look to for cues. Beside him, Manla speaks of his sister's first child, due in the coming moons, and his voice softens with something not quite worry and not quite pride. And he says, a man must be like a rock near a stream, steady, even when the current pulls hard. And the warrior nods, turning the phrase over in his mind, knowing it will stay with him, not because it is clever, but because it is true. Later, as the fire settles into a steady glow and the younger ones begin to drift away, some called by mothers, some by fatigue, the older warriors speak more slowly, the stories turning inward now, to memories of long marches, of battles felt more in the heart than the flesh, of those who did not return, and though no names are spoken aloud, each man knows the ones meant. And they sit in a shared silence thick with unspoken understanding, each gaze fixed not on the fire itself, but on the space just above it, where smoke curls into the night like ancestral breath. The warrior feels his chest tighten with that familiar ache, not sadness exactly, but the slow gravity of memory. And he knows that what binds them is not glory or even blood, but the act of remembering together, of saying without saying, you are not alone. After the circle breaks, the warrior walks with Manla toward the elder's hut, where his own mother and uncle now sit stringing beads into ceremonial cords, their fingers slow but sure, and he kneels beside them, offering to sort the shells by size. And his mother smiles faintly without looking up, the lines around her eyes soft in the firelight, and she says, even a warrior must know how to make things fine. And he smiles too, because he knows that strength without gentleness is like a spear, without a shaft, sharp but useless. As they work, the talk turns to small things, the stubborn goat that refuses to stay pinned, the cousin who now wants to try his hand at dyeing cloth, the way the moon has been rising late and orange, and each topic lands like a warm stone in a cool stream. Easy, familiar, rhythmic, and he finds his fingers moving more confidently through the shells, stringing them in neat lines, the feel of their smooth curves soothing, and his mother hums a low tune that drifts between them like a breeze. When the beads are finished, and the cords are wrapped carefully into cloth, the warrior helps clean the space, sweeping the dust with a reed brush, folding the mats, and lighting the small clay lamp that will burn through the night in case his uncle rises to pray. And it strikes him then how many forms of service exist beyond the battlefield, how many quiet offerings one must make to keep the world in balance, serving food, mending cloaks, listening without needing to speak, and he feels no less. A warrior for these things, but more, as if each act adds to his being like layers of earth over a root. Outside, the air is cool now, and the stars sharp against the dark, and he walks back to his hut slowly, passing others who nod or raise a hand in parting, each small gesture a thread in the great net of belonging. And he enters his home where his spear rests, his sleeping mat already turned down, and he sits for a while before lying down, his hand tracing the grooves in the mat as if reading a text written by time itself. The village is quiet, the fire's banked low, the drums silent, but still he hears the echo of laughter, of story, of the day's many small kindnesses, and it lulls him more than any chant, more than any song, for it reminds him that even in stillness he is held, that to be part of a people is to be constantly cradled by their presence, even when no one speaks your name. And he drifts into sleep, not as a soldier resting for war, but as a man wrapped in the softness of kinship, of home, of belonging, knowing that tomorrow he will rise and once again do what must be done, not because of command, but because it is his joy to carry his place in the world with honor and care. In the deep of night, when the wind curls low across the grasslands, and even the embers in the hearth sleep soundlessly beneath their ash, the warrior lies on his mat with the weight of stillness wrapped gently around his shoulders. The kind of stillness that does not come quickly or by force, but only after the body has known work and the mind has known meaning, and he breathes in slow and even, each inhale pulling the last of the day's dust from his ribs, each exhale offering it back to the dark with no demand, no rush, only surrender. And as his eyes close, not sharply but like a door swung slowly on old hinges, he lets the space between wakefulness and sleep expand, soft and unmeasured. And in that space his thoughts drift back, not in any order, but as scattered petals falling in reverse through. Memories breeze, the murmur of the stream at dawn, the warmth of the shield under his fingers as he traced the elders' carvings, the echo of Manla's laughter as they shared the last piece of honeyed root under the fig tree, the low drone of the bees near the sacred grove, the smell of smoke and roasted maize from the hearths at dusk, and all of it, every moment, settles in him now like polished stones at the bottom of a calm river, their weight not heavy, but grounding, reminding him of what must be carried and what must be let go. Outside, the moon is thin, a quiet scythe cutting through the darkness above the thatched roofs, and the village sleeps in a scattered circle around him, each family breathing its own slow rhythm, and overhead the stars gleam with an old silver light, ancient and constant, and he feels them, somehow, not just above him, but within him, as though the blood in his body remembers the sky and keeps its own constellation in motion behind his chest. There are no dreams yet, only sensation, memory, and breath. And the warmth of the woven mat beneath him cradles his hips, his shoulders, the curve of his spine, and the blanket, worn soft by years of use, is tucked beneath his chin, holding the scent of fire, of rain, of time, and from the distant hills a night bird calls once, long and low, its voice barely more than a thread across the air, and the warrior hears it not as interruption, but invitation, a gentle reminder that even in sleep, he belongs to this world. In the quiet of his mind, images rise like smoke, his mother's hands, sorting beads by feel alone, the hollow sound of spear tips knocking together in morning drills, the glimmer of dew on a spiderweb stretched across a reed stalk, the way a child's voice echoes off the crawl wall when they run too fast and laugh too hard. And all these pieces fit together into something whole, not a story exactly, but a feeling since that life, when lived with care and attention, must carry its own lullaby. He thinks of his ancestors, their bones beneath the soil not far from here, their names spoken in low tones at the beginning of every ceremony. And he knows they're not gone but near, carried in gesture, in instinct, in the small ways he moves through the day, and he offers them a thought now. Not a prayer, but a presence, saying without words, I have lived this day rightly. And in return, he feels the weight of their approval, not as a voice, but as a calmness, a loosening of something tight. Inside him, tomorrow will come with its duties, its sounds, its laughter, and its labors, and he will rise again, wash his face in the stream, greet the sun as it stretches over the hills. But for now, there is only this moment between heartbeat and silence, between body and dream, and he lets himself fall deeper into it, not pulled, not pushed, only allowed. Around him, the village is utterly still, the kind of stillness that only comes when people feel safe, when they trust the night to hold them gently. And he knows that trust is not given freely. It must be earned, shaped by years of shared watching, of shoulders leaned into one another, of dangers met and dissolved in the warmth of fire and story. And he is proud to be part of that watch, proud to be one of those who keep the pattern whole. A breeze stirs and then vanishes, lifting the edge of the mat just slightly before letting it fall again. And he shifts once, settling more fully into the earth beneath him, his weight now shared with the land, his breath mingling with the air that has moved through reeds, through lungs, through centuries. And he lets go, not of consciousness entirely, but of the need to shape it, to name it. And in this soft unknowing, he begins to slip beyond thought. Somewhere outside, a pot cools, its clay ticking faintly as it contracts in the chill, and a dog stirs in its sleep, letting out a low whine before settling again. And these small sounds are like lullabies in themselves, not disruptive, but rhythmic, anchoring the night in reality, in presence, and he welcomes them. His fingers curl slightly at his sides, not in tension, but in rest, and the skin on his cheek is warm from the mat, and everything in his body speaks of peace. Not absence, but fullness, the kind of peace that comes when nothing is left undone, when each thing has found its place. He feels the rhythm of his heart slowing, not with fatigue, but with readiness, the way a drumbeat slows at the end of a song, each echo fading a little further into silence. And as his breath evens into that slow tidal pull of sleep, he does not resist, does not linger at the edges of thought, but lets the night take him fully, kindly, completely. And now, dear listener, wherever you are, be it beneath your own blankets, curled into your quiet room, or adrift on a couch as distant lights flicker against the walls, I hope this journey has wrapped around you gently, the way soft wool gathers at your shoulders. And I hope you feel, as our warrior feels, that slowness is not weakness, that stillness is not idleness, but strength of a quieter kind. And as your own eyes grow heavier, your body softer, your breath slower, may you know that sleep, too, is a kind of honoring, a returning to the most ancient rhythm we carry. Rest now, traveler in time, student of quiet things, for the day is done. The stories have been told, and you, like our warrior, have done what you must. Now let your thoughts wander. I'll see you in another timeline. Good night.